In the years that Adam and Crystal have been here, Cindy and I have grown in our attachment to this congregation, and I am so pleased to be back with you tonight. We really appreciate all the love and sympathy we've received from you all this past week. It's been the most difficult week of my life, but singing has been very good for me privately and with others. And talking about God's powerful work in the world is good too. We depend on that. All authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. Go therefore. That's what Jesus said, having completed his work on earth, having died on the cross and arisen again. We are a people who are convinced of that truth. We believe that he has all authority. We are absolutely sure of God's continued providential work in this world. And Jesus says, go therefore, because we believe all those things. The only reasonable thing for us to do is to take the gospel to those around us and to send it around the world. And I'm happy to be talking to you tonight about work that God is enabling in one state in the country of India, the state of Andhra Pradesh. And to tell you a little bit about the part he's blessed me to have in that work so far in March and April of this year, and I have plans to go back on the 3rd of January, and we're making plans for that now. In March and April, we distributed Bibles. We did a lot of evangelism, training preachers, as well as strengthening churches. And we have enough time for me to tell you about a little bit of that tonight, and I thank you for that. India is in South Central Asia, of course. We've disappeared again. India is the 7th largest country in the world land-wise. The U.S. is 4th largest, to give you some comparison. It is the 2nd largest. India is the 2nd largest country population-wise, almost as large as China, the largest, with 1.4 billion people. What that means is, though India is only a third the size of the U.S., it has almost 4.25 times as many people as our country. When we think of India, most of us think of Hinduism. It is the largest, has the largest Hindu population in the world. And it is covered with Hindu temples of all sizes and shapes and colors. When we think of Hinduism, most Americans think about, some of you are mouthing cows, and that's what I grew up hearing about India was the cows. But even hearing about it, it was still quite striking that even in town, the number of cows we saw. They worship cows as gods. Those huge buses that have these air horns that they use to virtually blow people and motorbikes and small cars out of their way. When they come to a cow in the street, they do not blast it. They stop respectfully. They wait until there's a break in the oncoming traffic, and they slowly go around the cow. Each temple has its own cows, and they wander about, and the people wanting to please the gods feed them, and you can see this bull is so pampered that it doesn't even stand up when it's approached. It allows the man to bend over to feed it. But there are other animals they worship, like monkeys. And so you see monkeys in town, out of town. And you see a lot of other animals. Even if they don't worship them, all Hindus, I suppose, believe in reincarnation. They believe that their ancestors, after dying, returned in some bodily form, probably that of some animal. And so many Hindus are vegetarians, and they do not kill animals. They don't kill insects. And so even in town, you see lots of animals. All these pictures were taken in town. Pigs roaming around, groups of dogs. They didn't seem violent, so I won't call them packs, but chickens and other animals. Now, some of you are thinking, man, it must really stink there. I mean, a number of the places I preached, right outside there were pigs wallowing in the mud. But there it does not smell. Only one time did I smell anything even unpleasant. Maybe I've spent too much time in Asia. Amen. The other thing many of us think about when we think of India is the caste system. Now, when I was in school, even way back then, we were taught that the caste system was a thing of the past in India, that now it's illegal. And indeed, their constitution that the British helped them to write when the British were pulling out, I think back in the 50s, their constitution speaks of the equality of all and makes it sound like the caste system would not fit at all in modern India. But remember, we have a Declaration of Independence, and we have a constitution that spoke of equality for all when 85 or 90 years later, we still had slavery. And it's that way there. Technically, there are 4 castes, though some people will speak of 5 or 6. I'll talk about that in a moment. When the caste system developed a couple of thousand years ago, the top caste was the priestly caste. And most of the educators were religious. And so the top caste became the educators' caste. And then beneath that, you had the warrior caste. But of course, the warriors would go out and fight the battles, and the victorious would come back and rule. And so that second caste was the government administrative caste. And then beneath that, you had the merchants and the skilled workers, those engaged in the crafts. And then at the bottom of the caste system, you had the peasant caste, those who did menial labor. But that's the way it started out. As time has passed, instead of the caste being related to people's talents and skills and the education and training they sought, what they did to benefit society, more and more the caste system came to be related to the families in which one was born. And so for a long time now, the castes have had nothing to do with the character or the usefulness of a person. It's all about your birth. And even if with all of the restriction on access and an opportunity that comes if you're in one of the lower castes or not in a caste at all, especially even if you manage to develop some influence, even if you manage to make some money, you cannot change the caste you're born into or the caste that your children will be born into. That disturbs us. But here's the more disturbing thing, at least 51% of the population of India is not in any caste. The British, therefore, called them outcasts. And we have that word now in our language, outcast. Or they are described as untouchables because there is to be no contact between those that are outcasts and those that are in the caste, particularly no contact, even verbal, unless it's initiated by those in the caste. Imagine being among the outcasts, the untouchables, and the gospel comes to your area. And you learn of a teacher, yea, a religious leader, who is criticized by the religious elite for welcoming sinners and even eating with them, Luke 15, verse 2. Or hearing the story of Jesus going to the home of Simon in Luke 7, and while he is there, a woman comes in from the street and she bows down at Jesus' feet and washes them with her tears, wipes them with her hair, anoints them with perfume. And Simon, this Pharisee, this religious leader, thinks to himself, if this man were a prophet, Luke 7:39, if this man were a prophet, he would know what manner of woman touches him, that she is a sinner. Or Luke 5. Luke 5, when that leper comes to Jesus and dares approach him and falls before him and says, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. You can heal me. And Jesus is not only willing to heal him, but in initiating his doing so, Luke 5, verse 13, reaches out and touches the leper, the untouchable, and says, I am willing, be clean. Can you understand why the gospel does well in India? Why the fields are white, particularly among the untouchables, the outcasts? Can you understand why the religious elite, the Hindu leaders, are very displeased with the gospels coming there? Indeed, that is one of the major challenges of evangelizing in India, is radical Hinduism. And I thought I had the name of the place on there, but it's not there. In Telangana village, I was preaching one night, and afterwards, this man was brought to me. He had been baptized 2 weeks before. That week, radical Hindus had threatened his life 3 times if he came the night I would be there. But he was still there. Still there. The temples have depending on the size of the temple, depends on the size of the radius around, that no non-Hindu religious books can be visible. And most villages will have a temple right in the very middle to try to control any evangelism there. It's a sad situation. The work I did in India, a little bit in Telangana state, and then primarily in Andhra Pradesh in southeast India, and I want to tell you about some of that. Andhra Pradesh is the size of our state of Georgia, but whereas Georgia has 11 million people, Andhra Pradesh has almost 56 million people. On March 23rd, early in the morning, I landed in Hyderabad, the capital of Telangana. Hyderabad has a population of 10.5 to 12 million people, depending on who you ask. We thought it would be an excellent place for getting supplies we needed, particularly Bibles. And I was met there by one of three Indian preachers that I had become acquainted with online during COVID. Now, like some of you, over the years, hundreds of Indian preachers have contacted me, most of them leading with, "I need you to give me money." But three men, one of whom was Rajesh, single Rajesh, these men had Bible questions. These men were looking for advice on aspects of their work. And that caught my attention. And so I had lots of Bible studies with those three men. And Rajesh particularly began talking to me over a year ago about coming to India. But he walks everywhere he goes. And I'd seen lots of pictures of his climbing mountains and walking on very rough terrain. And some of you may remember that a year ago in this past spring, I had knee surgery, and my knee still did not feel like climbing mountains or anything like that. And so I just kept putting him off. But early this year, I'd been hearing that Vietnam was going to reopen. I'd not been able to go to Vietnam since October of 2019. And I kept hearing from Vietnam, the government says that it's opening. But the day my travel agent told me, "You can forget about going to Vietnam when you're available in March and April," they don't even have a method of getting a visa or applying for a visa yet. And there's no way that they'll have that all in place in time for you to be able to get a visa and go to Vietnam. That very day, Rajesh contacted me and said, "I'm wondering if you could come to India very soon. I have found someone who has a car, and we can hire him to drive us the entire time you're here. And we can't go to all the villages I've told you about since the car can't reach them all, but we can do a lot of good work. Can you come very soon?" And I took that as kind of a Acts 16 Macedonian call. You remember after that vision that Paul had, he told his co-workers in Acts 16, I believe it's verse 10, says, as Luke telling us, "And we concluded that God was calling us to preach the gospel to them." We have to do some concluding today also about what God would have us to do. And I concluded God must want me to go to India. And so that's what happened. And so Vijay and Rajesh came to pick me up, and a nephew of Rajesh's by the name of Pratap also was there. We thought we could find Bibles easily in Hyderabad, but it took hours and hours, most of that day. We found lots of places that you could buy one or two Bibles, but another evidence I felt of providence was the fact that I was thinking we would probably have the money and opportunity to buy and distribute 200 Bibles, maybe 300. But as it turned out, we had more than enough money for 500 Bibles. And finding those was difficult in the local language, but we were finally able to do that. And then in the afternoon, it was probably 4:30 before we took care of all of our business and headed south to Andhra Pradesh, to Dornalo, where Rajesh. It was only 175 miles, but 5.5 hours was really traveling to do it. mountainous terrain, switchbacks, and from one mountain you'd look back and you would see the roadways you had just been on, and then 2 tiger preserves with checkpoints, making sure that we would be out of the preserves by a certain time because it's dangerous from the tiger and cheetah and panthers and bears and other animals there. In Andhra Pradesh, I stayed in 3 places. At the beginning and the end of the trip, I stayed with the Rajeshes in their little 1-bedroom apartment in Dornala. And then we spent a good bit of time in Markapur, which at first, when Rajesh was telling me the plan as we traveled, I thought, man, why are we going to go pay for a hotel? It's just 20 miles from Dornala. And then I slept a few nights in their apartment with no air conditioning and very little ventilation even, and I was happy to go to Markapur. The hotel in Markapur was called the Grand. It was grand when the electricity was working and we had AC. It was not grand when I was taking a shower and there was no hot water. In fact, I really questioned why they called it the Grand until we went to Pitagorilla and stayed in the hotel there. And as we were unlocking the padlock that locked the room, I'm thinking, wow, that hotel in Markapur was grand. We basically used those 3 places as bases of operation and went to congregations around them, though around is used loosely. Sometimes it was hours to get to some of them. We worked in over 15 churches, from the southernmost to the northernmost, about 125 miles apart. And most of the time I was there, taught publicly 2 to 5 lessons a day, 7 days a week. I want to tell you about Rajesh. He's a remarkable individual. When he was 12 years old, his father, they lived in a small village, and the education was terrible there. The nearby school only went through the 8th grade. Rajesh was in the 6th. His father's thinking about the fact that Rajesh might only be able to go to the 8th grade. If he goes beyond the 8th grade, it's going to be to a school that's not very good, that is a distance away, which will require transportation that they don't have. And he heard about a boarding school opening in another state. Actually, that boarding school was opened by a brother from Canada. I have no idea of the financial arrangements and all. There might have been a lot about that I wouldn't agree with, would think is unbiblical. But there was a lot about the school that was very, very good. Had classes in every book of the Bible as part of their curriculum, and lots of teacher training there. Rajesh's father just kept writing, and every time Rajesh would receive what we would call a report card, his father would make a copy and send it to the director of the school. And when Rajesh was 13, though the school was intended for high school students and young adults, they received special permission for Rajesh to go at 13. It took him 3 years to complete every class in the school. He returned home when he was 16 years old, having learned and obeyed the gospel. And he came home and he began teaching his family, and he taught his parents first and then their siblings, and then he began teaching his older cousins and then his own siblings. He in time met the woman that his father and grandfather had decided would be his wife, and he taught her, and she was converted. And after their marriage, her parents were converted, and most of her siblings. Now it's a family of preachers. 6 of Rajesh's uncles on one side of the family and 3 on the other preach the gospel. He has cousins that preach. At least one of his brothers preaches. It's a family that is all about spreading the gospel of Jesus. Rajesh's family provides his family support, particularly his parents. His father is a red chili farmer. Did you know that red chili is not a spice? I know it's not, because when my stomach would be complaining about what I'd been eating, and I would ask them not to cook me spicy food, even if I just needed to eat rice for a couple of days, when they fried the chicken, it was always red, because red chili's not a spice. That's what they told me each time. He has a brother. Occasionally they will have rounds of affirmative action in which untouchables are given the opportunity to go to university, even professional school. And one of Rajesh's younger brothers in one of those situations was able to get an engineering degree. And so Rajesh is primarily supported by his parents and his brother, so that he and Rajesh's wife Esther can spend every day teaching and serving, and they do. He has no transportation, walks miles every day. This Lord's Day, he probably preached for 4 churches and walked 15 miles or more to get to them and back home. Late one Sunday, he and I were chatting, and he said he had just gotten home. And I'm looking at the clock, and I said, "You've just gotten home? It's well after midnight there." And he said, "Yes." And I said, "You were walking?" "Yes." "Is that safe?" Of course, I'm thinking of robbers. And he said, "It is sometimes safe." And then, realizing that he had been asking me to come, he thought he should encourage me. And so he added, "Only 4 times have we had to run from the tigers." I have, over the years, become more and more convinced that we should pay closer attention to Jesus sending out workers 2 by 2. And in India, I learned that there are reasons for going 2 by 2 that I never dreamed of before. Apparently, tigers are much less likely to attack 2 people together than 1 alone. So far, 22 congregations have been started as a result of the work that Rajesh began when he was 16 years old. And I had to remind myself that he was only 32. And I mean, they're working in all these villages. They're working hard to establish more congregations right now. He has a heart for sharing the gospel, and he has a heart for people in the most difficult of circumstances. One day we went to baptize some folks, and there was a drought on at the time, and it was very difficult to find sufficient water in safe places for baptizing. And we just kept driving, and we would come to a river that they expected to be able to use, and it'd be dry, and we'd come to a lake, or where a lake had been, and find only a lake bed, and we would just keep going. Well, we passed a village he had never been to, and coming back, he insisted that we stop, and we shared the gospel in that village. He's poor, but so generous in helping those who are poor. He has a wonderful family. His wife Rani, which is Telugu for Esther, apparently. And then his children, Mercy, who is 9, and Raven, who is 8. Such a sweet, sweet family. Esther is a great servant of the Lord in her own right. We would sometimes, besides when we stayed there at the beginning and end of the trip, sometimes we would be driving from one congregation to another, and we would come near Dornala, and we would stop for a break at their house, and often she wouldn't be there. If she was there, often there would be a bunch of children with her, or she would come while we were there, having just walked 30 minutes from a ladies' Bible class that she had taught. She has a real heart for orphans, and there are lots of orphans there, and street children, feeds the poor, especially brethren. She has some pots that are bigger than any I've ever seen in a commercial kitchen. Here, the two of them cooking over a wood fire for the poor. The children were so pleased with themselves just before I left that they had made cards and had gifts to give me. And of course, I was very honored. What they didn't know was I was more honored 2 weeks before when they noticed that my shoes were scuffed and dusty. And without their parents saying anything, they got my shoes and the shoe shining equipment out, and they cleaned and polished my shoes for me. They're learning the heart of service that characterizes their parents. The Rajeshes are super hospitable. They're tiny little apartment, but it seemed to always be full of people. During the day, each week, Esther has groups of children come in, street children, that she's teaching the Bible, but she's also washing their clothes, teaching them good hygiene, teaching them how to cook, just teaching them basic life skills as well as teaching them of the Lord. And then at night, often the people that are there, the night I arrived and the night I left, I don't know how many people from a distance spent the night there also. I had the little bedroom to myself, but the living room was just packed with people. Around the world, the churches that thrive are the churches that take 1 Peter 4 seriously, when Peter said to be given to hospitality. And I'm so thankful that there are folks here that are serving others by being hospitable. It is the way, a major way, that we're to be benevolent, both spiritually and physically, is to be using our homes and other means for the service of the Lord. One reason there are so many congregations is because Rajesh, ever since his own conversion, has been committed to preacher training. And I know you've been hearing a good bit about that lately. For a long time, Barry has been interested in it. I don't have time, but I'm going to tell my favorite Barry story. I don't know if I'd met Barry or not, but I knew who he was. My wife had read articles by him. She was very impressed with Barry, but she had not met him. And we were at FC at the same time Barry was. And we were in the bookstore, and we're standing in line, and Cindy notices that I have a copy of Barry's book. What is it? Training Young Men to Preach or something like that? Yeah. But preparing. And she said, "You're not exactly a young man. Do you think you need that book?" Well, Barry was right in front of us, and he had a dozen copies in his hand. And I said, well, I just figured, I mean, he's older than I am. I figured if that guy needed a dozen copies, I needed at least one. But Rajesh is very committed to training of preachers. Every week he does preacher training somewhere in his district. A district there is like a huge, huge county in our country. And here's a preacher training that he did soon after I left. And while I was there, we did preacher training each week. In Dornala, we had 3 days of classes and had, I think, about 45 men in those classes. I found out later some of these men are actually from denominational groups, but they appreciate Rajesh's work and they want to take advantage of training, and in the process they learn things in the scriptures that they've not had the opportunity to learn before. And it's this training that results in more and more and more effective servants there, which results in more and more congregations being established as more and more people are taught the gospel. I met, I don't know how many dozen preachers, but these are the ones that I worked with most closely. Those in the middle, Maria Babu and Kataya with Rajesh, they're really his right-hand men. And anytime he has an opportunity to go into the mountain forests where the tigers are, or in any other situation that he needs someone with him, those two men are willing to sacrifice whatever to just drop what they're doing and go and assist him. I was so impressed with their dedication. These men, they really are willing to become all things to all men, or though they are free and the slaves of none, to make themselves slaves of all, that as many as possible might be one. And one of the main ways in India and in the United States that we do that is when we submit our schedules to the schedules of those that need to be taught. And that's what they do. These preachers, for the most part, support themselves. But they do it with the lowest paying jobs, day labor, farming, or other types of construction work especially. Day labor pays very little, but it gives a man flexibility. They want to be available when the opportunities arise. And so all the brethren I met were poor, but the preachers were among the poorest because they want to be available to do the work. We talk about gospel meetings here. A lot of churches don't have them anymore in the U.S., but some still, follow their tradition of having maybe a spring and a fall gospel meeting. There's no tradition to it in India. They're effective, and so they're still doing them. And they don't do it just every once in a while. They have gospel meetings all the time. This one occurred in Dornala, where I had 2 or 3 gospel meetings while I was there. Right after I left, they had this one, and one night they had 450 people to come. Most of them sitting on the ground, as you can see. Now there they talk about gospel meetings and public gospel meetings. A gospel meeting is for the purpose of edifying the saints. Public gospel meetings are evangelistic meetings. They use PA systems virtually all the time. And sometimes that's good, because if you have 450 people, you probably need a PA system. But actually, if no PA system is needed for the primary assembly, they use PA systems so that people can hear from blocks around. In fact, Their way of advertising is the brethren telling people that the gospel is going to be preached and printing up the banners. The Indians love banners. And then about 2 hours before the preaching is to begin, they have the PA system and all set up, and they begin singing over the PA system, reading scripture, telling people it's time, the gospel meeting's about to begin, and inviting people to come. And they trickle in, and then as it nears the time that the preaching will probably begin, more and more and more people come. Sometimes they would ask us, we think more will come. Can you wait 20 minutes? Can you wait 30 minutes? And we would be in a house nearby or something, waiting until they said that enough people were there, and then we would come out and preach. They had what they call day meetings, evening meetings, night meetings. Day meetings, the preaching is at 11 or 12 o'clock. Most of those, if I preached in a building, that was when I preached in buildings, which was kind of strange because it was hot. Most of the buildings were not like the one you see on the left that had ventilation. Most of them had no ventilation, or if they were ventilated, they had low metal roofs. So you felt like you were in an oven. The temperatures while I was there were 104 to 109 every day, and it was rough for me especially. Sometimes we met outside though, and they would put up these canopies, and that's actually part of the publicity too. This fanfare of a big canopy being put up seems to attract a lot of people and then can provide shade as well during the meeting. And then they have evening meetings. We didn't have as many of those scheduled, though we had a number that we just added to the schedule. For instance, in that same village, we're going from one place to another to preach midday and at night, and the preacher at one of the villages in between heard we were going through, and he called Rajesh and said, "Could you stop here? I've been teaching a man about baptism. He has many questions. He believes in Jesus now, but he has many questions I can't answer about baptism." This man was 75 years old, converted 3 years before himself, but is preaching there in that village. And so we stopped. Well, what the brother didn't know was that the man he was teaching, after their sessions, would go and review it all with his best friend. And among the small group that gathered that late afternoon were both the man that the preacher wanted us to teach plus his friend, and they were both baptized that afternoon. It's the only baptism that took place in a tank. All the rest were in rivers or lakes or reservoirs. It was a great experience, though there was difficulty in my getting. We had to go right by the Hindu temple to get from where we taught to where the baptism would take place, and they virtually hid me in the car making the trip because the radical Hindus very much connect the gospel with foreigners, and so they're not happy when they see foreigners involved in spreading the gospel there. And then they have night meetings. The night meetings, the preaching begins at 7:30 to 9. We had one that we didn't begin preaching until 9:30. But they actually began before I intended. I mentioned Rajesh's nephew, Pratap, went to the airport to pick me up in Hyderabad. He had never seen an airplane, and his 16th birthday was the next day. And so he asked Rajesh if he could go to Hyderabad to see not only an airplane, but an airport. And so Pratap came with us. Well, the next day, we had arrived in Dornala about 9:30 on Wednesday night. On Thursday morning, of course, I'm very jet lagged, and haven't learned that when I'm jet lagged especially, I need to ask questions, not just give answers. But Rajesh said, Pratap called, and he wants to know if you can come to his birthday party tonight. Sure. I didn't know he lived over an hour away. Well, we went, and we get there, and there are all these people gathered outside the house in the street. And I thought that was interesting. And there was a PA system, and it sounded sometimes like they were singing, but I didn't know what that was about. I mean, what are they doing in an Indian birthday party? I had no clue. And then somebody came in and whispered in Rajesh's ear, and I said, what did he say? He said, 10 more minutes. I said, 10 more minutes till what? And Rajesh said, is your lesson ready? And I said, my lesson? I mean, I was going to a birthday party. I'm ashamed to say I did not even bring my Bible other than the Bible on my phone. And I said, my lesson? I thought this was a birthday party. Well, Pratap's father, when he heard you were coming, thought it would be good to make this birthday party more important. And so he invited the whole village to the party. And you're supposed to teach them about the responsibilities of fathers to sons and sons to fathers. But my brain works better overseas than it does in the United States. And it struck me that I could use Luke 1 and 2 and teach on the fathers turning their hearts to the sons and the sons turning their hearts to the fathers. And then finish up with Jesus, the Son of the Father. And actually it was a great night. And because so many preachers are related to Rajesh and Pratap, I didn't know it, but there were lots of preachers there. And they all surrounded me afterwards and said, in the preacher training, we want you to teach us how to make lessons like that. And I said, what do you mean? And well, it turns out what they've been trained to do is all topical preaching. And I guess they probably repeat each other's topical lessons. And they said, we thought we would know exactly what you would say. But you didn't say what we thought you would say. And the way you used the Bible and talked about Jesus, even on a topic like this, is powerful. And so that's what we did in one of the preacher training efforts that we did. That little birthday cake, they cut it in tiny little pieces. Everybody present got some cake. This is when we arrived, Rajesh and I arrived one night, the first night of a 3-night meeting in the village of Pramalapuram. Of course, I thought this was who I'd be preaching to, but they take us in the house. When we come out of the house, there are far more people. I mean, looking, you can see where the man standing in the background. When I stood and looked this way, I mean, it was people as far as I could see. And when I finished and turned around, behind me, there were also people as far as I could see, because the other reason they used the PA systems is because people in the caste will not come into an assembly with untouchables. And so using the PA system allows even the people in the caste to hear the gospel. And the streets and the connecting streets all around were full of people. And since that's the village Rajesh grew up in, people from the caste were calling him all that week, asking questions and making comments about what impressed them about Jesus and what they wanted to know more about. The young people typically sat in the front, then the women, then the men in the back. In Sunkasula, we had over 300 people in the primary assembly, but there were 2 denominational meetings going on that night and a big Hindu meeting. The 2 denominational groups let out early to come listen. The Hindu group made threats, and so at that point I didn't know I should be concerned, really. I was preaching on Acts 17 and Psalm 115 on idols that have eyes but can't see and mouths but can't speak, etc., etc. I thought it was a little strange when Rajesh set his microphone down and continued to translate, but without the microphone, and just let me keep preaching with the microphone, but it was because they'd received the threats. One question I've been asked is, in India, do they extend an invitation? That's very much an American tradition that we have. Actually, they do, but not like ours. One of my big concerns was people coming and maybe coming forward and asking to be baptized just because a foreigner was preaching. And I did not want to be a part of that at all. And so Rajesh and I talked about it at length, about that and some other concerns I had. And he said, don't worry, it won't be that way. Well, they extend an invitation, but it's an invitation for everyone who wants to learn more about Jesus to raise their hand. And preachers from all the surrounding groups come, and they among themselves kind of divvy up the audience, and they focus on who raised their hand, and as soon as the meeting's over, they make a beeline to those people and arrange the personal Bible studies. And as recently as 2 weeks ago, Bible studies were still being set up with non-Christians that had come and heard the gospel for the first time when I was there. There'll be no way to know how many people were baptized as a result. There were 15 baptized that I witnessed while I was there, but most assemblies, there were more than 15 Bible studies set up. Something I did not expect was that as soon as we finished each time in all but one place, all these people would come up and surround me, wanting me to pray for them. I mean, sometimes it would be about exams for young people, or it would be about getting into a university for high school graduates, or it would be a young married couple wanting children, or an older couple praying that they would be able to take care of each other in their old age, or just you name it. Sometimes we would pray longer than we had preached. These last 30 years, I've done a lot of taking Bibles to places where the people couldn't get the Bible either because of laws or persecution or poverty. And so I knew I wanted to take Bibles to the people of India. We were able to buy local language Bibles in India, as I mentioned, but it's not illegal to have a Bible, but it's difficult to get a Bible. Most people can't afford one, and even if they could, you're talking about the closest place to get a Bible being 40 miles away, and you don't have any transportation. that sort of thing. And so I was pleased to be able to distribute those 500 Bibles. Sometimes it was very orderly. The local preacher would have it planned out. Sometimes I feared for the people's safety, especially in the night meetings. They would be clamoring, reaching over each other. I was afraid someone would be trampled. It was just great to see how thrilled people were to have Bibles. Perhaps 10 to 20% of the people who could read had a Bible. And then you have many, many, many people that can't read, but they have somebody in their family that can read. So if there was 1 or 2 Bibles in the family, everyone could hear the word that way. And so I was thrilled to see young people who were excited about having a Bible and promising to read the Bible to those that were illiterate in their families. This group of young men asked for English Bibles. They're university students. They know English, and they think that they'll have more opportunities to teach the Scriptures to others if they can share the Scriptures in English. So in January, I plan to take a bunch of English Bibles with me since they can't be purchased in India. There are a lot of challenges there. Transportation is a big one. They have some roads that are pretty good, generally just 2 lane, but pretty good. But most paved roads are just a single lane. And then there were lots of gravel or dirt roads or just paths. And then the animals, water buffalo or oxen slowing the traffic, or flocks of sheep or goats. So it could take hours sometimes to go what we would consider a short distance. And often the only choice was to walk. And so fortunately my knee was doing better than I expected, and I was able to do more walking than I thought I would be able to do. Another challenge is the church building situation. Most of the churches don't have buildings. Many of the buildings, probably most of the buildings that I preached in, were actually denominational church buildings. The Seventh-day Adventists would be so excited about a foreigner coming that, they don't use their building on Sunday anyway. And so they would offer their building for the brethren to meet in on Sunday while I was there. Most of the brethren that have their own buildings, they're rented, but they're tiny. And a few brethren own buildings, most of them incomplete. It's tropical. Their buildings are mostly masonry, and so they can save up a little bit of money and put in a foundation, and it can weather okay until they have enough money to build a little more. And so they build in stages. But because their buildings are so small, or they don't have a building at all, they don't have baptistries typically. And that is a real issue there. If you don't have water, it's kind of useless to have a baptistry. And a lot of these groups don't even have room for a baptistry. And poverty is a major issue. Moses said, the poor you'll always have with you. And sometimes we can grow a little weary of brethren in developing countries writing us every time there's a major weather event. We need to think about how blessed we are in this country, that every town in the Nashville area plans to avoid flooding in most situations that in the past would have flooded even here. We need to be sympathetic, wise but sympathetic when we receive those requests for help. Ongoing needs there. They need PA systems. The brethren rent the PA systems for $25 to $40 a night or a day. And so there's they're doing all those gospel meetings frequently. The preachers are spending a lot of money renting PA systems. It would be fantastic if we could provide them PA systems so that then that money they've been spending on rent they could use for supporting the preachers or helping the poor or saving for a building or whatever. The preachers need transportation. Only a few of the preachers I met had any kind of transportation at all. Motorbikes especially would be very helpful. Bicycles are not very useful because there's so many mountains around. It's kind of hard to ride bicycles in the mountains. Individuals in the right circumstances could help with church buildings, housing for the preachers. I mean, many of the preachers are virtually homeless. They just live, their families live wherever they can. One of the preachers I was most impressed with, his family's living in an unfinished house. A relative started it, and then his company transferred him to another area. And so Mario Babu and his family are living in a house that has no windows or doors. The floor was never poured, so it's just dirt. Nothing's been painted. It's just a makeshift roof that often leaks when it rains. So there are lots of needs there, but I want to emphasize that we need to help wisely. In one place I did a day meeting. It was almost all women and children. I changed my lesson and preached on the significance of women and children in the Bible. And afterwards, this elderly sister, one of the oldest people I met while I was there, came to me and she took my hand, and I felt something in my hand. It was a 100 rupee note, $1.22. She wanted to be a part of what we were doing. Someone told me later that she lives on less than that per day, but she had it and she wanted to be a part. Well, we don't want to help in a way that undermines the local brethren's generosity and initiative, and that means we're going to have to be very committed to finding ways to help that won't hurt. But I hope we'll be committed enough that we will do that. And one way that we do that is by sending men we know. And if we do provide any kind of support for the preachers, that we follow the New Testament example of using messengers that go not just to carry the money, but actually to get involved personally in helping. Read the end of Philippians chapter 2 about Epaphroditus, how that's needed in our world today. I'll leave you with a few takeaways. The gospel's for all. Remember in Acts 15, or Acts 11 rather, when those that had been scattered by the persecution in Acts 8 and 9 came to Antioch of Syria. We're told some of them taught the Jews only, but some taught Jews and Gentiles, and the hand of the Lord was upon them, and many believed. If we want our work to thrive, we need to be people who want to take the gospel to all kinds of people, not just people like us. We need to especially encourage God's work in places that are difficult, especially if they're difficult and fruitful. In 1 Corinthians 16, verse 9, Paul was explaining why he delayed in Ephesus. And he says, because a door has been opened for the gospel, and there are many who oppose us. It was a difficult work, but fruitful. And Paul wanted to be a part of it. That's the kind of work we need to be thinking about encouraging, especially today. Leaders, realize that Ephesians 4, 11 and 12 give you a mandate to equip those you lead for serving the Lord. And the rest of you, if the leaders have a mandate to train, you have a mandate to want to be trained. Seek that training, encourage it. Young people, don't wait to be useful. Little Raven at 8 years old can serve, and I didn't begin to tell you the ways he served. I mean, when he traveled with his dad and me, that little boy would notice things that hadn't been taken care of, and he would take care of it. Don't wait to be useful. And let's all remember that God empowers us to do His will. He is a providential God. We're familiar with Ephesians 3, verse 20, that God is able to do far more than we can ask or think or imagine. We sometimes stop there, but the next phrase is so significant. According to His power that works in us. God empowers us for doing His will. And if you see an opportunity, believe that the Lord will make that opportunity doable. It may be that your place will be doing it from beginning to end, or just it may be your place is highlighting that opportunity for those with more ability, but they can't see the opportunity. God empowers us for doing His will. I want to finish up talking about one of the baptisms while I was there. The last Sunday I was there, we traveled from Pitagorala down to Dornala, stopping and working with congregations and encouraging preachers along the way. As you can see, it was a 3.5-hour trip in addition to the stops. And in Mandati, you can see Mandati near the top left. In Mandati, a woman came to me when I arrived, and she said, all my children are Christians. She had 9 children. All my children are Christians, and all of their mates are Christians except for one. And she named this daughter-in-law that was not a Christian. She knows about Jesus. I think she believes in Jesus, but she needs to be encouraged to obey Jesus. Teach her what obedience means. And so I changed my lesson and just preached through Luke chapter 5, principles of obedience. And though others raised their hand wanting Bible studies after we were done, I believe it was 9 said they wanted to be baptized, including the woman's daughter-in-law. And we went looking for a place to baptize. It ended up we had to drive 45 minutes. When we finally found a place with sufficient water, the place that we could reach the water, there were 2 Hindu temples overlooking it. And I follow Paul's example of I'm sent to preach, not to baptize. So I had not been baptizing personally the whole time I was there anyway. But in this case, Rajesh says, you need to sit up on the rocks and just watch. You don't need to be involved in this right under the noses of the Hindus. And so I sat way up there on the rocks looking down. It was an interesting vantage point. The preachers are baptizing there in the middle. To the left and the right, on the left there were women bathing. And to the right there were men bathing, amazingly modest, but bathing. And I couldn't help, as I watched that with the baptisms occurring in the middle, to think of 1 Peter 3, verse 21. Baptism now also saves us not the washing of the way of the filth of the flesh, but the pledge of a good conscience toward God by the resurrection of Jesus Christ. But one of those 9, Kumar, he came to me up on the rocks and he said, I was told you not baptize. And I said, no, I don't. But I'm glad you want to be baptized. And he said, from a child, I have thought if I was ever baptized, I want to be baptized by a foreigner. And I said, why? And he said, when I was a boy, the first foreigners I ever met came to my village telling people about Jesus. And they had great care and concern for us. And they did not convince me about Jesus, but they showed me what real love was. And then later I heard more of the gospel, and I began to believe, and I heard them talking about baptism, and I thought, if I'm ever baptized, I want a foreigner to baptize me. And I've been studying, and I decided this weekend I wanted to be baptized, and then I come, and you are here. And I think God also wants a foreigner to baptize me. But you say you do not baptize. And I said, it's not important for me to baptize. The one that's important in baptizing is God. The Bible teaches us that it's faith in the working of God who raised Jesus from the dead. That's the work and the worker that we're trusting in, is God, not the person that helps us into the water. It's God. But while the other 8 were being baptized, Kumar just walked around downcast. One time he did take off his sandal and stick his toe in the water and then turned away. And remember that song? It's not in many hymnals anymore. Jesus is calling. How does it go? Open the door. Why do you linger? And then the chorus, they are so happy, 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 who do their Savior obey. Why do I linger, linger, linger? I will arise and away. And I'm thinking about 1 Peter 3:20 and that song. Well, the 8 were baptized, and we all went to walk out of sight of the temple so that I could give Bibles to each of those baptized. But the preacher that had been studying with Kumar stayed back. And just before I began handing out Bibles, he came running and telling Rajesh, Kumar wants to be baptized too. And so I returned to my perch on the rock, and I watched as they baptized Kumar. But I worried that he might feel some animosity toward me because I wouldn't baptize him or something. But I was so glad when he came up out of the water, smiling as all the others had, that when he looked up and saw me high above, he smiled and he pointed to the sky. God had baptized him. Is there someone here tonight that needs to be baptized by God? God, who raised Jesus from the dead, wishes to raise you from spiritual death to spiritual life. You can die with Jesus, be buried with him, and then be raised to walk in newness of life. Like Kumar, you can leave being saved instead of being lost. You can be happy, so happy, in your adoration of the Savior and as you obey him. If you'll do that, we want to help you, and we invite you to come as we stand and sing.